Will you pray for me? Lord, may the words of my lips and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, because you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. He was 16 years old, and he'd been working on his uncle's farm pretty much as long as he could remember, and he loved it. He loved the early mornings before school when he would go blowing steam out to the barn and he could smell the hay and the alive smell of the dairy cows. He loved coming home after school and going back in that same barn, smelling just a little different for having had the sun on it all day. He loved the long days out in the fields. The farm was on a hill, and it went right up the hill there in Homer, New York, overlooking the town, and he would go up on top, and he would look out across the valley, and way to the right, on a clear day, he could see Cortland, and way to the left in the other direction, on a clear day, he could see the backside of Song Mountain, and he could see right across the valley, and he was 16 years old, but he was a mystic up there, and he loved that view. He loved watching them build I-81 slowly from right to left, right up towards Syracuse. He would spend hours lost in thought up there when he was supposed to be working. And as he drove the tractor, he would look and dream and look. And maybe it was that attitude. Maybe it was that mystical view that accounted for what happened. Maybe it was because he was just a 16-year-old and didn't always pay close attention. Maybe there was no reason at all. But when the corn picker jammed that day, and he got down to try to loosen the stalk that was caught in there, and the teeth loosened, and that stalk pulled my father's left hand right into the teeth. It didn't really matter why. They took him to the hospital, and they thought they were going to be able to save the hand, but a few days later, a staph infection set in. And so at age 16, my father lost his left hand right about here. I never knew him with two hands. I thought all fathers just had one. I could see other people's fathers, but I thought they were weird. I thought that you should mow the lawn with one hand. I thought the right way to wield an axe to chop wood for the stove was with one hand. They had to teach me that most people do it with two hands when I got into Boy Scouts. My mother tells the story of the day I came home from school in tears. I don't remember this, but she swears it's true, in tears. And she asked why, and I said that I had been given an assignment and I had to interview someone with a disability, and I was so upset because I didn't know anyone with a disability. My father would joke, he would say, it got me out of gym class for an entire year. And if he was feeling more serious than that, he would look off into the middle distance and say, it also got me out of Vietnam. He would boast, and it was true, he would boast that there was not one thing that he couldn't do with one hand except one. There was only one thing he couldn't do, and that was cut his own steak. Everything else, he was a whiz at. They gave him one of those hooks to wear at first, and he used that for a little while, but he got tired of that and got rid of it. They gave him a prosthetic plastic hand to wear so he wouldn't look so weird. He got tired of that. He moved through the world proud of the body he had, and there was nothing he couldn't do except the steak. Here's what it was like in Corinth. It was a port town right there on the ocean, and Corinth had a reputation for licentiousness. There were sailors all over. There were people coming from all over to trading routes that passed through the town, and wherever people come from all over, a town loosens up at least a little bit, and Corinth had a reputation. They say that the temple there had 1,000 prostitutes working in it. We've unearthed that temple since, and it is not a big place. It's hard to picture 1,000 people in there. On the other hand, maybe they were creative prostitutes. We don't know what it was really like in Corinth because all the records we have are from Athens, and they were rival cities. It would be like trusting a Boston Red Sox fan to describe the behavior of a Yankees fan and taking them at their word. So whatever people were actually doing, they had a reputation. And Paul founded this church in Corinth, and he wrote to them over the years whenever they had a problem, a real one or one that he perceived. And it seems that at least some of the people, some of the Christians in that town, were pretty loose. They had come from religious traditions that had a lot of rules, a lot of laws, and suddenly they had gotten in touch, they had fallen in love, they had met Jesus Christ, and they saw the Spirit that was beneath the words, and they said, we don't have to follow those laws anymore. We will live by the Spirit of Christ that has made us alive, and that means we can do anything we want. And at least some of the people came from traditions that had no particular laws, and so they thought they would just follow Christ the way they always had, and everyone around them was visiting prostitutes, at least if you trust the Athenians, and it seems that Paul thought everyone was too, and so he wanted to write to them because he had a thing or two to tell them, and here's what he had to say. Bodies matter. In that time and place, there were a lot of people with a dualistic worldview. Hopefully you've heard this term before, dualism. It's the idea that the spirit and the body are different, and almost always, when you're in a religious setting, it means that the spirit is more important than the body. All through Christianity, since the earliest days, since Jesus, since Paul, and right up to today, the theologians, at least, have been clear that dualism is not God's deal. That spirit and body both matter. That if bodies didn't matter, God wouldn't have gotten one on Christmas. God wouldn't have needed to have lived in one. Spirit and body are equally important. Now, those are the theologians. Those are the people writing the Bible. We all know, don't you know, that sometimes we forget that. Haven't you said something to somebody sometime when someone else was dying about their spirit being set free from some kind of prison? Haven't you had a thought that what's really important is deep inside you, and this is just a meat suit that you're wearing, that you will one day discard and go home to God and be there forever, your true self glowing and whole and perfect? I don't know if you have, but I have. I've thought that way. I've probably preached that way. But here's what Paul had to say to the Corinthians. Your bodies matter. And they don't matter just because. They don't matter because of some intrinsic worth that you're born with. Maybe you are, but that isn't the point Paul was making here. The reason your bodies matter is because they are a house for God to live in. Your body is the Acropolis. Your body is Notre Dame. Your body is Chartres Cathedral, says Paul. And if you treat it like it's just a house, if you treat it like it's just a shell, like nothing important could be happening in there, then you are missing a great opportunity. And here is Paul's problem with prostitution. He worried that it was just people rubbing body parts together and missing an opportunity for meeting God. He worried that when you just pushed your bodies together and didn't look deep inside and look for the God that is living inside each of us, that spark dancing in each of us, that you have missed an opportunity to touch the Creator of heaven and earth, and that is a shame indeed, said Paul. Then he twists the metaphor, turns the metaphor just a little bit. He says, not only is your body a temple for God, your body is also a member of Jesus Christ. It's like Christ's arm or leg in the world. You are the way God touches the world, interacts with the world, feels the world, smells the world, tastes it, touches it, moves it, fixes it, says Paul. And that's why your body matters too, because if your body stopped working, ceased to exist, God would have lost one of God's best tools in the world. So far I agree with Paul. Here's where I start to disagree with him. He said that only Christians were members of Jesus Christ. But the Bible says, and I believe, that Jesus Christ was there in the beginning. He is the Spirit of God that brought everything to life, that dances inside each person. And if that is true, then surely it is also true that every person everywhere is a member of God, is a piece of God's body, as an important piece that God would be loath to lose. So Paul wrote to the people, the men, the Corinthian Christian men who were visiting the prostitutes. You'll notice he didn't mention what it was like for the prostitutes. He didn't ask what this experience was like for them, but I think God was wondering about that. Actually, I think God knew very well what it was like for them, and that God would have included them if God and not Paul had been writing this letter, to tell them that they too are temples of God, whether they're Christian or not. Whether they had ever heard of Jesus Christ or not, they too are temples in which God lives and in which the world can come to experience God, to meet God and fall in love with God. And so I don't think God would write a big, long, moralistic thing about whether it was right or not to exchange money for rubbing body parts together. I think God would just say, don't ever miss an opportunity to meet me in the people around you. Don't let that go. It is too important. It's too precious. It's too hard to find. Even though everyone around you is a temple, it is too hard to look deeply enough to find. So when you have an opportunity, don't miss it. And don't treat the people around you as if they were not me, or a part of me, at least. My own arm in the world. And that is, I think, what Dr. King was saying. Why black bodies, why no bodies should be strung up in trees, because those are God's limbs in the world. Those are God's own temples in the world. And every time we do it, we waste an opportunity to touch the Creator of heaven and earth. And why would we be so short-sighted? So ignorant of our own best interests? Why would we turn away from the God in our midst? That's what he was saying. That's why it's a problem when gunmen storm Charlie Hebdo and leave bodies strewn across the floor, and when they storm Jewish grocery stores and leave bodies strewn across the floor. That's why it's a problem when ISIS tosses gay men off tall buildings for being gay, because every one of them is God's arm in the world, is the place where you can go to worship the Creator of heaven and earth. And why would you throw away that opportunity? By the time I knew him, there wasn't a thing that my father couldn't do except cut his own steak. He could do everything everybody here could do except that. So I believe that God will get along just fine. God will find a way to pull goodness out of evil, wholeness out of brokenness, love out of hate. God will figure it out if we cut off God's limbs. But I'll tell you what, even though my dad could do every single thing that you can, he would still rather have had his hand back. Say amen.